All. This is Dr. Mobeen Sayed. Welcome to the KoolBeens Cafe. So I want to start with the aspirin. So here, this is JAMA. I have this link in the description. So basically what they're saying is, so this is the US Preventative Service Task Force. They have released their updated 2022 recommendations for aspirin. What they're saying is the following. I mean, if I generalize it, and we'll go over the table in a second. If I generalize it, they're saying that don't use aspirin for primary prevention of the atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. Primary prevention is, so let's say that is in older terms, heart attack. They're saying that don't use aspirin to prevent the first heart attack, the primary prevention, because the risk benefit analysis may not work out correctly. The risk may be more than the benefit. Number one. Number two, they're saying that those who are already at risk, for example, they are diabetic, there an individualized decision should be made. That means the doctor and patient can sit down and discuss to use it or not. But they don't recommend it anymore. And for the secondary prevention, that means somebody who had a cardiovascular event and now we want to prevent an other cardiovascular event. There the recommendation is similar, but for the primary one it is changed. So let's look at it very quickly. So they're saying to guide the use of low dose aspirin for the primary prevention. So primary prevention is the first occurrence of atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease or heart attack, for example, or heart disease occurring because of atherosclerosis. Changing the age ranges and recommendation grades and focusing on preventing ASCVD. So they're saying instead of giving aspirin, let's focus on how do we prevent this. It being the task force, it now gives a C recommendation, which is recommend individualizing the decision to initiate low dose aspirin, doctor and patient. For adults, that means it's not recommended for everyone anymore. For adults age 40 to 59 years with a 10-year ASCVD risk 10% or greater and not at increased bleeding risk. So this is the C recommendation for them. D recommendation, recommend against initiating. And once again, this recommendation is for new initiation of aspirin, not for the existing folks who are taking aspirin. D recommendation, recommend against initiating for those 60 years and older. For colorectal cancer, the 2022 recommendation concluded that data were insufficient, although in the previous time they had said it may be useful. So here, this contrasts with 2016 recommendation, which addressed both ASCVD and colorectal cancer prevention and gave a B recommendation, recommend initiating for adults aged 50 to 59 years with a 10 years ASCVD risk of 10% or greater with a life expectancy of at least 10 years and not at increased bleeding risk. So they had said start it for them. And a C recommendation, recommend individualizing the decision to initiate low dose aspirin for select adults aged 60 to 69 years with a 10-year ASCVD risk of 10% or greater, and I recommendation, that means insufficient evidence, for adults 70 years and older or younger than 50 years. So here is their table. So if you see here, comparison of the 2016 and 2022 USP-STF recommendation. So here, this is 2016. In the 2016, for 50 to 59, they said B recommendation. Here, they're saying 40 to 59 now for primary prevention of ASCVD, individualizing the decision if 10-year risk is greater than 10% and not at increased risk of bleeding, then the C recommendation. Otherwise, no. And C recommendation is that patient sits down with the doctor and they discuss. And more than 60 years of age, do not initiate. And they're saying that there is no, as you read here, insufficient data. So that is the aspirin discussion. Now let's see how are the KoolBeens doing. Denise says keeps buffering. Sorry about that. Is it buffering for everyone? Denise says, okay, I'm back. I had to make some food, ironically. Well, the good thing is I talked about the intermittent fasting while fasting. Okay, so Janet says, regarding the ajwain tea your wife makes you, does she add anything like ginger, lemon? Nothing. She actually made it in front of me. I asked her to show me. So she took a pinch of ajwain, that's it, put that in a bowl of water, and she just boiled it. Once it was boiled, then she, cooled it down a little bit and put that in a cup and gave it to me. Nothing else. And then she kept saying, this would make you feel warm. It increases the blood pressure. So not everyone should take it. So be careful. So I don't have hypertension. So I was okay. But it does make me feel a little warm afterwards. Alexander says, Dr. Bean talks about fasting while the chat is all about food. This is my life. Ramnik says there are ajwain cookies. So, of course, there is ajwain as well, but somehow that ajwain tea had. Do you see that it almost stopped it? This is what I mean with the long COVID, that we have to interrupt that at some point. And once it is interrupted, then the patient starts feeling better. So I had this cough and it was not getting interrupted. It was just continuing. And was that allergies or COVID or whatever? And I only took that ajwain, what do we want to call it, tea, 3 times. And I'm back to fasting as well. And I was coughing a little yesterday. I coughed a couple of times today, but generally I'm fine. So, Roller Girl, what about meds that have aspirin in them? Of course, now that would be a discussion to sit down with the doctor that what was the purpose of the aspirin in there. So they're talking about continuously. So Doug has a good question. Doug says, what is the interval of intermittent? That's a good one. So let me actually. And I believe various people do different interval for intermittent fasting. Let me share my screen. I would suspect that it has to be at least more than. So here, again, I am not offering any advice. We're just educating ourselves together. We are actually, I love this part. We are in a cafe and we are sitting down together, having fun, not having food, at least me. So, intermittent fasting method. There are several different ways of doing intermittent fasting, all of which involve splitting the day or week into eating or fasting periods. So, 16-8 method, also called the Langerhans protocol. It involves skipping breakfast and restricting your daily eating period to 8 hours, such as 1 to 9 p.m. Then you fast for 16 hours in between. Then eat, stop, eat. This involves fasting for 24 hours, once or twice a week, for example, by not eating for dinner one day until dinner the next day. The 5-2 diet. With this method, you consume only 500 to 600 calories on 2 non-consecutive days of the week, but eat normally the other 5 days. And I can actually give us, I always like it that we are able to think about these things. So when we are fasting, so what happens is, let's say we ate food now, hour 0. You know that there is a glucose spike that comes in, And with that, there is an insulin spike, and then the glucose moves into the cells and it goes back to the baseline within 2 to 3 hours. So that means normally a meal would give us energy or nutrients that would go on for 2 3 hours, at least in terms of glucose. Other nutrients can keep getting absorbed from the gut even more longer. Then after this 2 3 hours, body still needs to continue to operate. And so it will go finding glucose. And it is liver's job to provide that glucose in the area of fasting. So now we are officially, for the body, we are fasting now, 2 3 hours after the meal. So body goes to liver and says, pretty please, can you find some glucose from somewhere? And liver says, well, I got some glucose stored in me. I can give you that. So liver would break down the glucose that is present within the liver and then give it out. And that depends how much is there, but it would work for some hours, maybe an hour or so. Then the body says, well, I need more glucose. You don't have more glucose now. So then the liver will start asking the fats and other things to say, give me some fat. I'm going to use that to convert that into glucose or other nutrients that directly use fatty acids. So now the glucose is going to start doing gluconeogenesis. It's going to start making new glucose. Now it's not mobilizing glucose from its stores. It is now making new glucose. And it would continue to do that till we have another meal. So that means within 2 3 hours, we have gone in a state of fasting. However, it is not sufficient to trigger autophagy and everything until the cells start starving. And that is another few hours and they do not get more glucose. And they say, all right, I'm going to start. So that 8 hours type fasting is, I think, enough for a trigger. I would suspect that 5-6 hours later, because for 5-6 hours, glucose and liver and the body would use what is there. After that, it's going to start starving. And that is when autophagy like things would start getting triggered. Now, how long do you stay hungry is up to you or you and your doctor. So Rima says, what's the news on aspirin? The news is that they say we do not have, they do not recommend aspirin for prevention of primary atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, that is primary heart attack. So remember, aspirin is used, baby aspirin is used daily to prevent the possibility of a heart attack. So they're saying that the risk of bleeding and strokes is more than the benefit. So it's not recommended anymore. For more than 60, not recommended anymore either. More than 70, don't initiate. It is said to not start because there is no benefit. Those who are already on aspirin, it is not a recommendation for them to stop. This is for new start. And then they're also saying that if somebody is at risk of atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, for example, and the risk is 10% or more for 10 years and so on. So they have the criteria. But what they're saying is, if somebody has a risk, for example, somebody is diabetic, then they should sit down with the doctor and decide. So this is individualized. Still, there is a good news in here that they're saying, go ask the doctor, instead of saying, I have told you. Nipa says, can people who have gastric issues, gastritis, etc., can do intermittent fasting? So basically, if we keep our stomach empty and stomach is producing acids and there is no food, there are certain ulcers that can become aggravated with that. So it really depends upon what kind of gastritis and what kind of ulceration, if at all, is there. And based on that, you decide. JMT says keto diet. What is it? A long separate topic. It's an interesting diet though. Mostly meat based. Romnick says some people do fasting as a means to have their demands met. That's true. So Malak Fortar says how to take supplements that suggest taking with food, but you're on a 24, 48 or longer fast. Actually, taking supplement daily isn't a great idea. The researchers say that supplements should be taken today, then skip a day, then taken again, and that allows the body to go in full cycles with the supplements and become more sensitive to them or stay sensitive to them. So, number one, if you are actually skipping a day, that is fine. Number two, um, it is fine if somebody has 24 or 48 hours and the supplements are at that time. Most of the supplements can be present already in our body. We replenish them and they can stay on. A, D, E, and K, we remember it as cat is on the ADEC instead of ATIC. A, D, and E, and K can be stored in fat as well because they are fat soluble and they can be there for a long time. So, Carrie, not taking supplements daily helps in this way that when you take a supplement, for example, our body uses it and it can become, according to some researchers, it can become less sensitive to them. So, giving a gap actually allows the body to stay sensitive to it and use supplements more and better. Bambi says, there's a cardiologist on YouTube that puts his patients on intermittent fasting. Forgot his name. Intermittent fasting is very interesting. Robin says, I'm more ketovore. So Embol says, muscle stores glycogen. Yes. So I'll tell you a story, muscle story, medical story. So I was doing medicine and one day a person was teaching me and we were talking about this exact thing, that where is the glucose stored and how is it removed and used. So it was a she who was teaching me, and she said, look, and she was a senior, so look, here is the liver has glycogen, right? Plus liver can do gluconeogenesis as well. So here is liver. And when we need glucose, first of all, we ask the liver for the stores of its glucose, and then we ask it to make more glucose. On the other hand, the muscles also have stores of glucose or glycogen, as you said. And she said, look, muscle looks like a fish, and it is a selfish thing. And what did she mean by that? She said it has glycogen as well, or stored glucose. But when muscle breaks down the glucose, it does not let it go out. So remember the last step of gluconeogenesis or making glucose is that so glucose becomes glucose 6-phosphatase, correct? 6-phosphatase. Or on the glucose molecule, at the sixth molecule, there is a phosphate attached. So this glucose cannot move across the cell membrane because it has a phosphate attached to it. It's kind of a blocker for it to move. And if you remove this, excuse me, remove this phosphate, then this glucose becomes capable of going out or coming back in with the glucose channels. So liver, when it makes the glucose, it removes this last piece of phosphate as well, and then glucose is free to get out. But when the glucose mobilizes its glucose store, when the muscle mobilizes its glucose stores. It does not remove this phosphate, and it just reuses it from there in the glucose metabolism. And so that glucose that muscle has, even when it is broken down from its store, it never gets a chance, or it is not allowed to get out. It is just used within. That is why muscle is a selfish. It looks like a fish and it is selfish. And now, generally, it's a good thing. If we are starving, then it is muscle's job to bring us to food. And if the muscle itself has given up all the glucose and cannot move anymore, then when we are starving, we are not going to be able to reach food anywhere, because we'll just be slumped over somewhere, not able to move our muscles, and just be stuck. So muscles do not give away their stored glucose. They break it, but they use it for their own movement. Okay, so Lisbeth says, meanwhile, in America, yes, the KoolBeens, we are the best in mechanisms. There is no place on the internet where a community with such deeper knowledge of mechanisms is present. Ashley says, Advil kills my stomach. Yeah, so if you have to take it, so then with food or sometimes with other protections like antacids or lots of ways talking with the doctor, but Advil does do a number on stomach. Hmm. So Bob says, I take Advil today. I think my doctor's not too thrilled about it because it may cause clots. So far, I haven't had any problems with bleeding while taking it. Yeah, so they're saying that the risk of bleeding is more than the advantage of preventing the first event. So what I'll do is this: I'll go more deeply into that report and come back with more and accurate data. But this is generally what they're saying. So Alexander says, tip for fasting: don't try to eat a big meal right before starting it. Counterintuitively, it makes it harder to do the fast. Eat only a normal size meal. So when I fast in the morning about 4:30, I take a bottle of water and one date, and that's it. Roller Girl says, I like Dr. EB because he studies every day. Very nice. So there is a Dr. EB. So VV says, so stop taking vitamin D. I've been taking a lot daily. So vitamin D is a different situation. Here is why. It is a fat soluble vitamin. So even if you take more every day, it first goes to fat. I mean, it goes to the body and being used to, but it goes and gets stored in the fat, and it is continuously given out from fats too. So becoming sensitive to it is not a problem. So you take it daily or every other day, as long as the levels are kept and the stores are kept, you're fine. There are people who take, let's say, doctors who give 100,000 units or 150,000 units once a week or once 2 weeks or once a month, because they'll store it in their fat patients and then it can continue to be used. So Fat solubles can be every other day, every third day, even every fourth or fifth. But the water soluble, they usually are used up immediately. And then there are some part that is, if it is over, our body cannot store it. So they are just peed out and they're thrown out. So water soluble every other day is fine. Fat soluble can have even more uh, distance between them. So this is JMT Hero says, what is the role of fiber in our diet? There are so many roles that we can discuss, and there are so many theories. There are books written about it, so I cannot do justice, and I do not know all the aspects. But what I know from a being a humble medical doctor who knows just enough that is taught, fiber, number one, it helps with the um, it absorbs water with it. It absorbs some other materials, and so it keeps the stool consistency less hard. So it is useful in constipation. Secondly, fiber can actually help create a wall around the uh, gut and be protective about the gut. Thirdly, fiber itself can actually interact with the microbiome. And some people actually get, for example, gas with fiber. And that is because the bacteria and the fiber are now interacting. And there are some advantages of that as well. You are very welcome. So what I said was kind of uh, scarce because there are there are books for how to what kind of fiber, how to use it, what kind of effects it will produce, and so on. What kind of fiber is digestible, what is not digestible. Below the age of 13, who can digest it? Above the age, so there's a lot more science there. M. Gregory says, I eat a lot of broccoli. Thank you. Thank you for eating it for us. So Ashley says, how about the fibrinolytic enzymes? I do not know. They only talked about the aspirin. So again, talk with the doctor to see what is their recommendation. Um, but this guidance is for aspirin. So KC says, if someone takes bile acid sequestrants for bile acid malabsorption, how does that affect glucose levels? Normally, if you're taking them in the therapeutic levels, they should not make any difference for glucose. At the end of the day, glucose or the foods that are glucose rich would break down into carbohydrates and the smaller molecules, monomers, and they would be digested. So two different mechanisms. So, Patty Zig, the important thing to note here will be that you'll sit down with the doctor and the discussion would go something like this, that how is your osteoporosis progressing or not? So usually this is not a very high number. There are some studies that actually say that 8,000 international unit per day are necessary. But of course, we know that recommendation is 4,400 or 800 in women with osteoporosis. So this, from a recommendation point of view, is a higher dose. But we all know that you should sit down with the doctor, and uh, you can make more with the sun every day. Juby, that is correct. That blood work is interesting for the levels, of course. So, Super Alien, your question, I see it, but I cannot answer that. It's a personal advice, and that's the problem. Oh man, the first super chat. So, thank you very much, R. So, I usually recommend people to look at the I Recover protocol on the FLCCC site, and there all drugs and their recommendation are present. Roller Girl. Thank you, Roller Girl. This is the first ever super chat for this channel. Ashley says, I'm still curious about this plant based vaccine. So, Ashley, I have already talked about Medicago a couple of weeks ago. And some folks were asking about Paxlovid. I have talked about Paxlovid as well. So, what I did was today I tweeted it. Plus, I believe I posted it as a as a post on the YouTube channel too. Actually, I'm so proud of the Paxlovid. If I can go find it, I did a lots of drawings when I had done Paxlovid. So if I go to DrBeen YouTube Paxlovid, so this was, I still remember, I drew so with so much love and passion, especially this this guy with these teeth, proteases, and then there was another one, this hat like thing, the protease. It was just so funny, and I loved this one. So I hope you can see it here. These are the drugs that are part of the Paxlovid, ritonavir, and niratrelvir, and their actions. So the Japanese drug that is coming out, that is actually 3CL protease. So that is similar to this. And look at this in the background. These guys are sitting and breaking down the proteins. This is so funny. I loved doing this lecture. Sometimes when I have decent time, I love to draw, but sometimes I'm working on the business matters and this. Oh man, cyber nurse, another 20 second that. Thank you. Thank you very much. This is the beginning of this channel, super chats. So Roller Girl and Cyber Nurse, thank you. Super Alien says, I saw the post on Twitter. Good, thank you. So Texas says, yep. That reminds me of France. So Ashley, Medicago is here as well. So if I go to DrBeen Medicago, here, somehow that day the card, the Windows had updated, and the network card was, I should like my own video. So it should take this. This is Medicago. If Ashley, this is the plant-based vaccine you're talking about, this is plant-based, then here is the link. I had not shared my screen, but anyways, here is the Medicago. So I just looked for DrBeen Medicago. And I don't know if I was sharing my screen when I was showing you Paxlovid and admiring my own drawings. Lisbeth says, I love the artwork for cancer immunotherapy talk. Cells were great. Thank you very much. I like making these cells. Yep. Somebody should have a phone. Actually, I keep my phone's bell off. So if you missed the Paxlovid, I'm so sorry. then the Paxlovid was this. Can you see it? So here, look at these guys. Look at this. I don't know if I have already shown it. Look at these proteases. How cute are these with those little uh, teeth? I actually crack up on my own diagrams. Look at them. Look at this guy running around. And I loved this diagram. This is the 3CL Pro, and this is the ritonavir, and this is Trelvir, and these guys are the proteases in the back, munching at the proteins. I spent a lot of time drawing these. It's actually quite a lot of work to start at 1 o'clock, and by 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock, you have to understand, digest, and draw and write and then present. I actually tried to have an artist, and I showed him one of the videos and I said, these are the drawings that need to be done. And he came back and he said, okay, these are about 20 slides and every slide has 4 or 5 illustrations. I will charge you $30 per illustration multiplied with the slides. So that was like thousands of dollars. And he said it would take, 1 week for this many illustrations and 25 days for the full. So it was a lot of hard work on his part. So Juby says, your artwork with all of your lectures is what differentiates you from the rest, as well as your jovial demeanor. Thank you. You're very welcome. Thank you. So one more super chat, Robin, third super chat. Thank you. That is exact. Yes, I did. I do. So, the story of my drawing is the following. So my uncle raised me. My mother and father separated. They had 4 children, and then father left the country. Mother was sick. So what happened was, so we were all distributed, the 4 of us. Someone went to one family, other family, mother, one with the father. So I was raised by my uncle. So I think he was just trying to keep me happy. So one day he said, do you know how to draw a river? I said, no. And he drew exactly something like this. And then, to my fascination, he did this. And I see his beautiful super chat. So give me 1 second. He did this. Something like this with his pencil. And then this. And then this. And then he did like this. And he said, this is a river. And I became so excited. I became so enamored that how easily he was able to make a river. And so I became just so excited since then that I have been making these rivers since then. So MGW, thank you so much. Thanks for all you do. You've fought through a lot of your beans and for yourself against the system. I would love to see one final presentation on unvaccinated stats with BA2 from various countries. I've heard that vaccinated death protection is now less than 40% for double vaccinated. Okay, so thank you very much for the super chat. And yes, will do. Joby, thank you very much for the super chat as well. Today I'm showered with the super chats. So Nicolene Alma says, no way to substitute your creative talent. Your heart is in the art. Yes. So I believe I was, at this time, I was not even able to read or write, but I just started drawing. And so since then, I love to make these 3-dimensional things by making these, what is that, shadows. Roller Girl says, I can actually understand because of your drawings. My dad is an architect and draws to explain to. Thank you very much. Yes, I can actually. Do you know that I cannot? When I go for talks before pandemic, universities used to invite me, and I would go there and I'll present something. There are two things without which I cannot present: drawing and a free mic. If you tie me to a mic, for example, in the rostrum, I cannot talk. So I have to have a wireless mic, and then I have to walk around. I actually go in the crowd and I discuss things. So when I present, that is my only requirement, that you would have to have a wireless mic that I can use. Kini says Bean River, correct. Carrie says, did something happen to Luffy? No, nothing. He actually, just before 6 o'clock, he wakes up like 5:30, starts meowing, and then one of us goes and lets the king out. And so he goes out. He will come back about 8 o'clock. Um, Kelly, absolutely. Me too. So I think I was thinking about this the other day, that pandemic is over. So now we can actually create a possibility of meeting in various parts of the country. Iggy Pop, I don't think that they say this for all respiratory vaccines, but flu is a virus. So what we learn is the following: any pathogen that has drift and shift in its antigens is difficult to make a vaccine for. So, for example, flu has a drift and shift. Fortunately, coronaviruses have the proofreaders in them. So their drift and shift is actually less. So although we hear about variants all the time, but they still have a very low rate of change, and the vaccines should have worked. And you know that the vaccines are not working. And that is a different dynamic. That dynamic is the population size was so big that the virus just kept mutating. And so this idea that somehow vaccine caused the mutation, that's not true. It was happening before too. It will continue to happen too. Fortunately, those folks who said vaccines would cause it, they also said we would be in trouble. But you can see that the variants are becoming lesser and lesser lethal. That's why societies are opening up. I know that there are still people who say that they're not becoming less lethal. They're still as bad as before. But um, the clinical observation is different. Heather says, great drawing of the river. I love rivers. Thank you very much. This is the river. I should sign it. This is the river I used to make from the whole life. So Adi says, I understand that vitamin D from UV production on skin takes a long time, and showering soap washes it away before it gets to the bloodstream. How long do we really need to wait to shower? So I have not heard about shower, because the vitamin D, um, the chemical, the ultraviolet rays, and the um, interaction with the cells where the vitamin D would be converted, that is under the skin. So it's not on the surface of the skin. Surface of the skin is mostly dead cells. And so we can't make vitamin D there. It's in the active cells. And so they cannot be washed away by soap, at least from a mechanism point of view. Maybe there is a theory that I'm not aware of. And then the production of vitamin D, if the sun is at the correct angle and the rays are decent, then full body exposure for half an hour can produce sufficient vitamin D for the day. but sometimes we cannot have the full body exposure, and so then it would change. Plus, sometimes the sun's angle in various seasons is not good enough, and sometimes the rays are filtered through the atmosphere. So there are many factors, but a good bright sunny day with the correct sun's angle in 20-30 minutes gives us sufficient. And then of course our skin, if we have more melanin in the skin, then the rate of production is different for vitamin D. Kini says the class I'm playing hooky from is Introduction to Voice Recording Techniques. Awesome. That's nice. That is correct. Yes. So I would take, so most of the cough is actually gone. It's now just a very less remnant. And that also exaggerates when I speak. But I think I would take one more cup. Carrie 2 says, Dr. Bean, are you hesitant to be around the unvaccinated? Not at all. Not at all. Robin says, Dr. Bean and all my fellow KoolBeens are all such lovely people. We can change the world with all this love. Absolutely. At the end of the day, caring for each other is what wins. Adi says, I don't want to walk around sweaty for hours. No, so you don't have to. So, yes, roller girl, melanin can actually interrupt the sun's rays. This is why folks with the darker skin have a harder time to produce vitamin D from sun. Ashley says, I put in Discord, but would be curious on your thoughts on the new preprint. Minocycline possibly helpful for COVID long COVID. Theory is tetracycline antibiotics have amyloid inhibitor effect, possibly. Possibly. So let's see. Must be here. Would repurposing minocycline alleviate neurological manifestations of COVID-19? That will be an interesting one. So this was in 2020. Now we are in 2022. I don't know if it was actually used, but it's interesting. Thank you for sharing. Juby says you're inspiring me to do a mural on my. Absolutely, please do it and then send us a picture on Discord. You are very welcome. So Bay Area Aquarius says, such rubbish they put you through for Alice in Wonderland riddles. This is very good to know. Denise says, I can't tell you how incredibly well I'm feeling 72 plus hours post Evusheld monoclonal antibodies Saturday. I haven't felt this well in years, so it is prophylactic, pre-exposure, and therapeutic for few lingering long COVID. That is excellent. So this means that you may have had autoantibodies, and so this one is going and neutralizing them. Very interesting. Kini says, I was intimidated by the technology, but Dr. Bean has inspired me to work harder when I find things are difficult. The reward is always on the other side of the hard things. Easy things everybody can do. So, and hard things would actually make our brain struggle and make an effort and become alert and release chemical substances and improve the memory, improve cognition. It actually, harder things actually, just like if we do hard work with muscles, they would build up. Similarly, when you do hard work with the brain, it becomes better. Sorry about that. Meanwhile, in America, yeah, there is hardship here. And then I hope and pray you fully recover. And of course, you would then feel great. That is correct. And I'll give you an example of my own growth. So during these 2 years, 2.5 years now, I started in a very innocent way to say, I'm going to serve. And I did not know that I will be so uh, keenly and deliberately punished as well by some. And so when it started happening, I used to get very um, nervous and used to become very anxious. And my anxiety used to be, I'm not doing anything to harm anyone. I'm actually trying to serve, and the people are still taking it as not good, and they are doing this to me. And now I have reached a point that people threaten me every day. The latest audit failure has caused me um, hundreds and thousands of dollars, more than $500,000 loss, and I'm able to continue to work. So we grow, we all grow. Yes. So with this, so Ashley says, were you ever censored on Twitter? If so, will you be returning? So I am already on Twitter. In my whole presence on Twitter, I was censored once. I am not very active on Twitter in terms of interacting with people. And the reason is simple. If you think about it, I have to run my business. Then I do these talks. And for this talk, for 2.5 years, think about the demand it has from me. The audience, KoolBeens, someday they can skip it or they can go on a vacation and then come back and the work is there. For me, I have to be there every day. And so after lunch, 1 o'clock till this time, 8, 9, I will be in this. And during this time, my family is not allowed to come in and talk with me. I'm just preparing and drawing. So no lunches with family, no dinners with family, no interaction after 1 o'clock. Before that, business discussions, business meetings. And so weekends are the ones where there is some more liberty. And so doing that for 2.5 years has been a, when I started, it seemed like it's nothing, one lecture, so what? And now this has become a body of work that is thousands of lectures. And so fortunate for all of us that we were together, we did it together. I was talking with my wife this weekend that for 2.5 years, I have practically been absent. And so uh, interaction with my children, with my wife, with my friends. Everything is stopped, halted. But I'm very, very grateful that we became friends, and this became something from nothing. And this, I think there is some service that happened. So Twitter, I was not very interactive. So my time has been so limited that when I go on Twitter or other places where there is interaction, for example, somebody would come in and say, why did you talk about this thing? And I'll say, here is the reason. And then they would say, no, I don't think this should be this way. And that debate never finishes. And so I find it very difficult to answer people to their satisfaction. Some people will not be satisfied with any answer because they have a different leaning. And their criticism or their pushback is more rhetorical than curiosity to say, let's figure out what you're talking about. And I am known to, if I make a mistake, acknowledge my mistake, remove my video, do a replacement video, and so on. But some folks just do not want me to talk. So again, your question about Twitter, I'm there, but I'm in a very low profile, share some things, share my videos, announce guests, and that's it. Correct. This is a lot of work. And think about it. We started in March, April of 2020. So 21 is the full year. Then 4 months now, and then 8 months then. So about 2 years. So multiply those 2 years days with 2 lectures daily, sometimes 3, but mostly 2. But more than that, the segment of time from 12 to 8, 9 daily, that's a lots of time. I'm glad that we did it, and I'm happy that we became friends, meaning there is a benefit and reward back to me. It's not that I was sitting without any benefit, but this was a lot of hard work. So when I used to go through this hard work and my arm was hurting and it was becoming numb, and my elbows and my shoulders and my positions were incorrect and people were threatening me, I used to think just one thing: there are people who are dying in this pandemic. Who am I to say my arm is hurting? So that is how I just kept going. I just demanded more from myself, thinking that people are dying. So with this, let's stop for today. And yes, I like this Bean Gang. Yes. So let's break for today, the Bean Gang, and we will meet each other tomorrow. Thank you very much. There are links in the description. Like, subscribe, share. And then if you want to support the work, there are links in the description. You can use them to support. Thank you, and see you tomorrow.